What's up guys, Tom with Verus Engineering, and today we're going to be doing the install for the front splitter on the Shelby GT350R. Alright, so here's what you'll be provided with in the kit. Obviously you'll get the carbon splitter, carbon polyweave splitter. You'll get an assortment of brackets that we'll use to hard mount this to the chassis. You'll get an actual bag of the real hardware. This is just for me to keep things organized here. And you will also receive 3 pieces for the air dam setup. You'll have 2 side pieces right here, and this guy will be the centerpiece. So with that, we're gonna jump right into the install. All right guys, so to start with, we're gonna be working in this area here. The first thing we're gonna do is remove this front Shelby branded front lip here. If you guys had a couple aggressive track days like us, it probably may have already removed itself. But with that said, to start doing that, we're gonna remove these Torx bolts around the back, and they will be a T30 Torx. And then once you have those removed, there will be 4 holes that are recessed up into the bumper, and there will be 4 bolts pointed towards the front of the car, and there will be 4 bolts pointed towards the rear of the car, or straight up, I guess. But basically, you're gonna wanna remove those bolts. I believe those are 7mm heads. Once you have the front lip unbolted, we're gonna start unbolting the engine under panel. And to do that, it's going to be a bunch of 7mm head hex bolts that you're gonna remove. They're on the perimeter all the way around. There will be 2 pop clips in each fender well up here and on here. And then there will be 1 Christmas tree clip in the center here. This will probably be best removed with like a panel popper or like a small screwdriver if you have one of those clip removal tools. And once you get all of that removed, we'll basically have to pop the retaining clips out of the front of the Shelby lip. I'll show you that, a close-up of that in a second. Once the Shelby lip is physically off the car, there will be a couple more 7mm head bolts holding the under panel on. We'll remove those, and then the under panel will come off of the car as well. And once that's off, we'll be ready to assemble brackets and get that put together for the splitter mount. All right, so we've got this Shelby branded front lip off the car, and this is kind of what it looks like on the top. And if we get in a little bit closer here, these are the retaining clips that go into the bumper itself. You see this one's actually missing. They're pretty weak from the factory, and they will break off with any kind of unwanted pressure that's applied to them, i.e. curbing, or you go up a steep driveway or something like that. These are the Torx bolts that I pointed out earlier around the rear edge. So we've got that off. We're gonna remove the engine under panel and go from there. We've got the under panel removed from the car. We're gonna start clearancing this bad boy for the mounts that we're gonna have bolted up to hold the splitter secure to the car. So you're gonna want a couple pieces of painter's tape, and you're gonna want get yourself a nice tape measure here. And what we're gonna do here is, if you see this rib, we're gonna place the tape measure on the other side of the rib, hook it, and we're gonna measure across, and you can see to the first line, or the edge of the hole is about, it's about 7.5 inches. And if we move to the next one, it's going to be about 11 3/4. So again, that's from this point to this point, about 7.5 inches, and from this point to this point, about 11 3/4 of an inch. You're gonna do your best to make a straight line that goes towards the back of the car or towards the rear of the under panel. And your rear boundary here is going to be this hole here. So if you notice these square holes all around, you're gonna take this flat portion, or this boundary, this edge here, and you're gonna use that as your guide to cut straight across laterally from side to side, and that'll make your pocket. I would recommend using either a body saw or a cutoff wheel here. You want to try to get the lines as straight as possible. All right, so we're going to take the bumper off so that we can install our splitter rods. And in order to do that, we're going to remove all of these 8mm head bolts along the top edge of the bumper, as well as two 5.5mm bolts. That would be one on each side. What you'll want to do is just peel up the weather stripping that is attached to the bumper, and that'll show you where these 5.5mm bolts are. So go ahead and take those out, and then we're going to move to the wheel well and begin removing the clips that are necessary in order to gain access to the corner bolts that are behind the headlights. All right, so we've got the wheel liner peeled down, looking at about 13 of these pop clips that we're gonna have to remove. They are pretty much all situated forward of the strut. Kind of see that here. There's one back here, and there will be one tucked away behind the fender here. But again, the rest of them will be forward of the strut. All right, so if we peel the wheel liner back, we can also see the connector here that needs to be disconnected, as well as the corner bolt that will need to be removed. You can kind of see that there. So we need to take that off on both sides and disconnect the connector on both sides, and then we're ready to take the bumper off. A couple quick things. These guys here, you can see these little raised tangs. Basically, they're the clips that retain these boys. You're gonna wanna pick the bumper up, kind of just like pull it up a little bit and then out, and it'll release pretty easily. Not too bad, but you do need to pull harder than you would probably initially think. Here is the connector, a better view of it. It's a double lock, so you will need to pop the red, won't really do it right now, but you'll need to pop this red tang up, and that will allow you to push down on the release in order to get the connector disconnected. And here's the connector on the bumper side. And as you could expect, this is the hole for the bolt that we had to get. That was kind of buried all the way up in here. But yeah, that's it for basically the last details on how to remove the bumper. And that's what she looks like. All right, we've got the bumper off of the car. Next step we're gonna need to do is drill out the holes in the crash bar in order to get the rivet nuts installed so that we can install the splitter rod clevises. So first thing we're gonna do is measure approximately 10.25 inches from this edge right here. Take a tape measure, hooks on really nice. Well, of course I say it hooks on really nice and then falls off, but you're gonna make a measurement of 10.25 inches. Make yourself a mark like I did here. Make yourself a little note if you like. And essentially from there, we're going to basically measure the distance from the center of the clevis mounting hole to the edge of the clevis itself. And we want the clevis to be basically, once it's bolted up, to be flush with, or mostly flush with the face of the crash bar. So that turns out to be roughly about 5/8 of an inch. Again, that's 5/8 of an inch inward and 10.25 inches from the outside edge of the crash bar. You're gonna make a mark and you wanna drill that to 3/8 of an inch. If you like, you can step it out from about 1/4 or 1/8 and 1/4 and 3/8 if you like. That's up to you. Go ahead and install the rivet nut using our rivet nut tool. All right, so for your rivet nut install, we're gonna take the rivet nut tool. Basically, you'll be supplied with a socket head cap screw and this installer portion here. Grab your rivet nut and thread it onto the socket head after you have inserted it through the installer. You're gonna put the rivet nut into the 3/8 hole that you just drilled. Make sure you hold it flush against the bumper. and then you're going to tighten the 5mm Allen portion while you hold back the 9/16 hex portion with your wrench until the rivet nut is sufficiently crushed. Once you get significant resistance is basically when you'll know that it's sufficiently crushed. Once you do that, back the bolt out and you'll have a good rivet nut. So you will want to repeat the rivet nut install also for the other side of the vehicle once you have done one side of the vehicle, obviously. So once you've done both sides, we'll basically be able to assemble or bolt the clevis up to the crash bar. And so in order to do that, we're going to take two of the clevises. Again, that's two, make sure it's only two clevises, and we're going to drill out the center hole with a 1/4" drill bit, and basically that's going to allow your mounting bolt to slide right through and bolt into the rivet nut that we just installed earlier. So moving on towards that, let's take our low profile socket head cap screw, 25mm, and we're going to insert it through the, I guess if you want to call it the clevis portion of the clevis, just like that. Take your Allen socket and thread the bolt into the rivet nut that we just installed, making sure that the clevis the opening is basically parallel with the front of the vehicle. So we have the clevis installed. Want to repeat that process again for the other side of the vehicle. And then we will need to clearance this duct just a little bit. You can see right here, what I've done is just basically cut a little notch out. It's probably about 1 inch wide and about 1 inch deep. I used a pair of side cutters. So all you need to do there is kind of snip a little piece off, and then I was able to just kind of cut the sides and then bend the tab down, and it snapped off after a bit of light scoring on the back. Maybe use like a razor blade or something like that. So do that on both sides. You'll have the clearance you need to install the splitter rods, and you'll have the clevis that you need to mount the splitter rods. So now I'm gonna go grab the splitter rod and show you how to assemble that really quick. All right, we've got the splitter rod here. So in order to install this, a couple quick things. We have supplied two 25mm extensions. You kind of see them there. Basically, you'll want to thread them into the splitter rod, and what we prefer is that the extension be on the chassis mount side. That way you don't have to see the extension on the outside of the vehicle. So that being said, for this particular car, and your car may be slightly different, but from rod end to rod end, center to center on the rod ends, we have about 11 and I'm gonna say 5/8 of an inch, which is pretty much sucked in all the way. You shouldn't have too many threads, maybe like one thread visible. Your mileage may vary. It might be different for your vehicle, just by a hair. But that being said, you should be able to, at that point, just adjust one end if you'd like, because there's more than enough room for adjustment on one side if it's fully sucked in. So with that in mind, we're going to take our rod end and we're going to put it in the crash bar, or the clevis that's mounted to the crash bar, rather. And we're going to take a 12mm washer and our 25mm button head cap screw and install it through the clevis and the rod end on your splitter rod. And then you're going to take your M6 serrated flange nut and thread it onto the other side. You can obviously do this in any direction that you want. I find it easier to have the button head or the Allen portion facing the outside of the car, because just the nature of Allen sockets and Allen keys is you need a little more clearance to get into there. 10mm on the nut, but once you get past a certain point, it should resist most of the backing off, so you can really tighten it to about 6 foot-pounds, just like that. Once you're done, you can kind of, once you have that snugged up, you can kind of position this in a mostly straightforward position, and we'll get ready to mount the bumper. I should say as well that this is a turnbuckle style, if you will, splitter rod. So you have right hand and left hand threads on either end. That way when you turn the splitter rod, it either expands or contracts. So be sure to have the right rod end, or don't try to force the threads in on the splitter rod if they're not going in very easily. You might have the wrong side. Once you have the measurement set, be sure to tighten down. I left this one loose so that I can have a little bit of adjustment at the end, but be sure once you have your length to tighten the jam nuts and make sure that everything is good and snug so that you don't have anything rattling loose when you're going down the track. All right guys, so we'll also need to trim the grill, the lower grill on the front bumper. See, that's the upper grill. Here's the lower. You may want to just pause it on this section so that you can kind of count the number of openings until you get to the ones that you need to cut. This is what I have found works best for the splitter rods when I did the install. You might find that you could cut less out for a cleaner install if you like, but I found that this gave just the right amount of wiggle room so that when you install the bumper, you're not just like constantly fighting the splitter rods, trying to get them in the right hole and everything. But yeah, all I did was take a pair of side cutters and cut these like, zoom in a little bit, these little kind of supports here. I just snipped them flush and actually worked out really well. All right, moving back to the front of the car, we've got all of this area is exposed, and the first thing we're going to do on the car is remove this crossbar, if you will, between the two frame rails. There's going to be 2 bolts on each side, right here, and then holding it to the frame rail, and there's going to be 1 more bolt holding the lower piece of the ducting for the radiator. We're going to remove 3 bolts on each side, 6 bolts in total, and then we're going to take this thing off the car, and we don't need it anymore. Okay, one quick note before moving forward. Your factory setup is going to have 2 fold nuts here, along with obviously the bolts that went in them. You're going to want to keep those 2 bolts, and you are going to reuse those fold nuts. We, during R&D, basically had this thing on and off a bunch of times, so the fold nuts ended up wearing out. So we replaced them with rib nuts. Okay, so we're going to assemble the bracket assembly for the splitter mounting. Basically, we've got 3 brackets that we're gonna sandwich together and then bolt up onto the car. Personally, I think it's easier to assemble everything now and then take the entire assembly and then bolt it up to the car. But basically, here's what's gonna happen. So you've got this rear bracket, you've got a middle bracket, and you've got, I guess if you wanna call it, an outer bracket. So we're gonna stack them together in this order, just like this. And hopefully you can see that. We'll get a close-up once it's bolted onto the car. But basically we're gonna bolt these up together using the 20 millimeter button head cap screws, 18 millimeter washers, and the M6 serrated flange nuts. Once we bolt these all together, we'll throw them on the car, and I'll show you what the correct orientation for this guy is and how it looks on the car. But basically, if you remember, there were 3 bolts on that crossbar we took out. This one is going, this hole here, this little extra tab here is going to be the one that holds the ducting, like I called it earlier. And by doing that, you'll keep it from flopping around and a bunch of other bad things. So we'll put this together and then we'll show you what it looks like on the car. All right, we got our brackets installed. The last part that we need to mention that we couldn't go over before is this through bolt right here. It's going to be about 100 millimeter socket head Allen. You use a 4 millimeter wrench to put it through, or a 4 millimeter wrench to tighten it, and you're going to use an 18 millimeter washer with it and a 6 millimeter flange nut on the back. It's going to go through a hole in the frame rail that looks just like this, but obviously over here. And basically you'll see on the other side, there's the flange nut, and you'll tighten that down. Here is the third bolt that was holding that crossbar in, that is now bolted to the ductwork for the radiator. So here's what it looks like. Here's the other side. All right, with the bracket installed, we're gonna reinstall the under shield that goes there. We clearanced it earlier for the brackets that we just installed. Once we get that under shield on, 2 more C brackets are gonna go right here and right there. We're gonna tighten them down with a 7 millimeter wrench, and we'll be back. Right, now we've got the under panel installed. Got our brackets on the sides, just like this. Now we've got the center brackets, these little C-shaped brackets that we're gonna need to install. So basically the under shield will be sandwiched between this bracket and the bumper. You're gonna reuse the 7 millimeter factory bolt that went here in the first place. You wanna have them clocked so that they're straight front to back, just like that. And the last thing you want is to grab a level, and you want to make sure that this guy, the bottom of this bracket and the bottom of this bracket are kind of on the same plane. That way, when they bolt to the splitter, you know, because the splitter is going to contact both of them at the same time, that they'll be nice and even and have even pressure applied to both of them. So we're going to do that for both sides. And now, with all of that installed, we'll be ready to get the splitter installed. Okay, so to get the splitter up onto the car, to start, what we're gonna do is only bolt up the holes that have the large counterbore in them. Not these guys with the series of 3 holes in them. Those are gonna be for the air dam. But basically these 2 holes and the 2 holes on the corresponding side are going to be for those 2 big brackets that we just mounted to the car. These 2 here will be for the C-shape brackets that we just bolted up, and these outer holes will be for the, I guess if you want to call it the outer arm of the bracket that was sandwiched in there with them. We're going to use the 25 millimeter button head cap screws, and we're going to use the large fender washers that came in the hardware kit. Everything is slotted, so you will be able to adjust the splitter side to side. We're gonna need to bolt this up to the car, center it, and then we can, if we want, start some of the other bolts. Once we get the other bolts in there, we're gonna start laying out the outline for the bumper and what will ultimately be the shape of the splitter, or I'm sorry, the air dam that we're gonna have to bend up to the correct shape. So let's go do that now. All right, so we've got the splitter mounted up with the hard mount bolts. It's solid enough to get us to where we need to be. We're gonna worry about the rest of the bolts after we get the air dam bent up and fitted correctly. But basically we're gonna do that now. A couple things about the air dam. You're gonna receive in your package a mostly flat piece of stock with the exception of 1 bend for each side. We want to basically form this by hand. It's pretty easy to bend, to be honest. Use your knee, just bend it over your knee, use your thumbs, kind of bend it like this. You want to make small adjustments just to contour the bumper itself. So basically, as a point of reference, you know, this hard bend is going to go right on this fang, I guess you want to call it. and you want to start bending, you know, this radius here just to get it to fit correctly. You want it to sit on the contour of the bumper without any kind of real pressure or any kind of force to get the bolts through the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'll show you what it looks like once this is bent up correctly, and then we'll get to bolting up the rest of the splitter. All right guys, so I have the air dam pre-bent in what is basically the rough shape of the front bumper around the fang and around the curve here. What I'm gonna do now is bend the other side up, and then I'm gonna take the splitter off, and I'm gonna basically start all the bolts for the air dam for the, you know, the three different sections, and then I'm gonna loosely try to bolt the splitter back up again. The holes for the air dam are slotted, so once you're done bending everything up and you have them loosely bolted and everything's bolted onto the car, you will basically want to push the air dam as close as you can get it up against the bumper. And that way you get a nice tight fit, a clean look, and like an overall seamless install. The only other thing to mention is there will be some trim guard installed in the package. The trim guard will basically go along the top here, and I'll show you that at the end. Basically, you're just gonna cut the correct length for however long this edge is, and you're just gonna push it down on top, and it'll basically help keep the sheet metal air dam from rubbing up against any kind of body part, you know, rubbing the paint off or chipping anything or anything like that. So with all that said, I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and I'm gonna show you guys the finished product. And here we are. We've got the splitter bolted back up to the car. I finished bending up all of the air dam pieces, bolted them down to the splitter, and then bolted the splitter back up onto the car. For the air dam, once you get it bolted, or once you get the bolts started on the splitter itself, you're gonna wanna bottom the nuts on the top side, this side, and with the bolt going up through the bottom. You're gonna wanna bottom that nut out. You don't wanna tighten it too much. You don't wanna tighten it at all. You want to be able to move the air dam around once you get the splitter up here. That way you're able to push this tight against the bumper, and then once it's tight against the bumper, you can tighten it the Allen side on the bottom. The serrated nut on the top will resist backing off as long as it's making contact with the air dam surface or whatever surface that it's tightening against before you start to tighten. So basically, again, you want to bolt the splitter back up to the car with the air dam attached to the splitter. And then once you have the splitter attached to the car in the correct way, making sure it's, you know, center as much as possible, you're going to work from the middle out, pushing the air dam up against the bumper, and then tightening each bolt, moving from the center out on the air dam. We're gonna go ahead and make sure our splitter rods are adjusted to the right length, and we're gonna bolt up the clevises to the splitter. So in order to do that, I like to place the clevis on the splitter element itself and make sure all of the holes line up with the rod end and the clevis itself. Once we have that set correctly, we're going to take our 16mm button head and our 1¼ OD washer, and we're simply gonna push it through the bottom of the splitter and thread it into the clevis like so. Then we're going to take our 25mm button head cap screw and a 12mm washer on the button head side. We're gonna slide them through the clevis and the splitter rod, and we're going to use our M6 serrated flange nut on the other end. Once you have this installed, go ahead and repeat the process for the other side, and you're done. You're gonna wanna torque those M6 bolts down to about 6 foot-pounds. Don't kill them. They shouldn't strip, but again, 6 foot-pounds is all you need. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for the installation for your front splitter on your Shelby GT350R. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, be sure to email us at sales@verus-engineering.com. Until next time, we'll see you.